Max Beckmann was born on February 12, 1884 in Leipzig, Germany. From 1900 to 1903, he studied at the Grand Ducal School of Art in Weimar. After graduating, he left for Paris, where he had experienced the style of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist. In 1904, he left Paris and moved to Berlin. During this time, he painted the world as he viewed it. Beckmann was the epitome of Expressionism and allowed his true feelings and ideals to be portrayed for the world to see. In 1914, World War I had begun, and Max Beckmann volunteered as a medical corpsman for the Army. However, in 1915, he was discharged after suffering a critical nervous breakdown. During the war, 20 million people, including both soldiers and civilians, were killed. The war had introduced new technology that was used as deadly weapons. Tanks, machine guns, airplanes, and poison gas were first used in this war. Soldiers on both sides created trenches as protection on the battlefield. Soldiers had to stay in these trenches for weeks or months at a time. They endured mud up to their knees, rats, and unsanitary conditions. This later became known as trench warfare. During the battle, soldiers would fire out on open ground and bodies remained where they had been hit. The exposure to the gruesome and bloody scenes of the war had impacted every soldier's mental state. Beckmann was one of these people who would have to carry the memories of war with him for the rest of his life. Beckmann's art and his style had shifted. He started to paint distorted figures and would depict cruelty and pain. He began to showcase what war was really like, not noble and powerful, but scary and depressing. The war had completely transformed Beckmann's art style. In one of his earliest works, Young Men by the Sea, which revealed impressionist techniques that he acquired and the delicate arrangement of his figures is apparent. However, his other works like The Descent from the Cross reflects the suffering from the war. Created in 1917, a year before World War I ended, the pain that was endured during this war is apparent across the corpse of Jesus. Beckmann had painted the corpse pale and covered it with bruises and sores. He painted the arms across the frame and to continue the shape of the cross Jesus has taken down. This painting is an alternative shift compared to his early work before the war. Beckmann began to capture the emotions of fear and human reality. He was able to paint the effects the war had on him and his view of reality. As a child, Adolf Hitler had shown a natural talent for drawing and painting. He idolized architecture and often thought about how to improve existing buildings to make them grander. Hitler was known as an academic artist, which styled their artwork after architecture produced under the influence of European academies of art. Hitler enjoyed any artworks that captured what he viewed as ideal, such as German buildings, European women, and realistic works. In the spring of 1906, Hitler took his first trip to Vienna, the center of art, music, and Old World European culture. It is said that this is the visit that caused Hitler to fall in love with academic art and sparked his interest to become an artist. He decided to attend the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts in October of 1907. He withdrew his inheritance money and went to live and study in Vienna. He later took the 2-day entrance exam for the Academy School of Painting. Hitler felt extremely confident while he awaited the result, very sure that he would be accepted into the Academy. Unfortunately, Hitler was rejected from the Academy. Hitler's rejection stunned him. He went back to the Academy to get an explanation and was told that his drawing showed a lack of talent for artistic painting, nobility, and a lack of appreciation for the human form. Around the time of his submission, the world was being struck with new concepts of thinking and a very modernized point of view on life. Mainly music, art, and culture experienced the most change in a very short period of time. After the First War, people were interested in this new way of thinking, rather than focusing on the way things were in the past. This became known as modernism. Modernism took the world by storm, especially in art. Artists began to drift from the traditional approach of art and focused heavily on creating works using an inward technique. An inward style consists of looking at the inside of one's thoughts and feelings rather than focusing on the exterior. Artists use bright colors, dysmorph bodies and faces with new brush techniques and just about anything that happened to come to mind. This was a time of free expression. Expressionism soon took over the art world. People became infatuated with the new style. As said before, Hitler was the farthest thing from expressionist or a modern painter. He was in fact the complete opposite. Hitler's art not keeping up with the times greatly affected his chances of being accepted into the Academy, and obviously it didn't work out in his favor. Hitler developed a strong hatred for expressionism and modernists. At the time he took power, Hitler made sure to manipulate the public into hating expressionism as well. Once Adolf Hitler took power, he created a museum dedicated to shaming all kinds of art that he hated. This included any form of art from the modern world. Ironically, Hitler marked the same artists that happened to be admitted into the same academy that he could not get into. Nazis would take any art that they pleased and place in the Degenerate Art Museum. The art was held here against the will of the artist and kept under horrible conditions. In this exhibit, there were works done by some of the most prestigious artists. Those that were once getting the utmost praise were now having their pieces ridiculed and humiliated simply because Adolf Hitler wasn't a fan. The Descent from the Cross is one of Beckmann's earliest works from his development in his artistic style. Beckmann had sold this piece to George Hartmann, but then was returned to Beckmann after it had upset Hartmann's wife. Beckmann then sold it to the Stadthalle Museum in Frankfurt, Germany, where it was removed by the rich Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda because it was considered degenerate art. The Descent from the Cross was moved to the Degenerate Art Museum, where it and Max Beckmann were ridiculed for not fitting in with the ideals of culture in Germany. The Descent from the Cross is now displayed at the Museum of Modern Art. However, the painting is housed at the Museum of Modern Art is complex. During World War II, the Descent from the Cross was displayed at the Degenerate Art Museum, though under Nazi government, they had given Kurt Valentin permission to sell degenerate art. Kurt Valentin was from Germany and was an art dealer, specifically selling modern art. Valentin was given looted art from the Nazis that was deemed degenerate and then sold to several American museums. One of the paintings that was handed to Valentin was the Descent from the Cross. The painting had become a part of Valentin's estate, and once he passed, U.S. authorities had taken possession over his estate due to the Trading with the Enemy Act. This act enabled the President and the U.S. authorities the right to oversee and or restrict any and all trade with the enemies during war. Valentin had acquired these paintings by the enemy during the World War II and created a business out of doing so. In 1955, the Museum of Modern Art took hold of Beckmann's The Descent from the Cross and is still on display till this day. Although Kurt Valentin was beloved by many for his work in transporting modern art, and the Museum of Modern Art is known as one of the most prominent museums, The Descent from the Cross did not belong to Valentin and should not be housed and celebrated at the Modern Art Museum in Manhattan, New York. The Descent from the Cross has a complicated history like many other artworks that survived World War II. However, the Nazis had wrongfully taken the painting from the Stadthalle Museum in October of 1936. Though many may argue that it was the Nazi that's held control over the government during that time period and it belonged to Kurt Valentin, morally it is not right for the Museum of Modern Art to have possession of the Descent from the Cross. And even though the U.S. authorities had legally taken hold of the painting from Valentin's estate under the Trading with the Enemy Act due to Valentin's deal with the Nazi government, it was not morally correct for the Nazis to have stolen the painting and handed it over to Kurt Valentin. The Descent from the Cross was sold to the Stadthalle Museum and was stolen and humiliated by the Nazis because it was not appraised by their ideals. It rightfully belongs to the Stadthalle Museum, one of the oldest museums in Germany, which is established as a civic foundation, a museum for the people and the community. The Descent from the Cross was taken away from its home, ridiculed, shipped overseas, and taken away, and is wrongfully displayed. It should be returned to where it was stolen from and should be cherished by the people of Frankfurt, whose history endured the tragedies of World War II and the reign of the Nazis as well.